So I've basically been sitting here trying to record this. ADHD is real, guys. It is so real for me. But anyways, before we get into this, shout out to Kwesi Poku, who is 6 goals CPL, left back, left bin, now striker. And the reason why I bring him up because I wanted to talk about the depth for Canada when it comes to the fullback position, because it's interestingly short of depth. Right? Earlier this year, you had no Sam Adekugbe, you had no Richie Laryea, and the fullback depth was Alistair Johnston and Alphonso Davies. Yeah, that was it. That's the tweet. That's the quote. It's a conversation that's worth having, especially in terms of the depth and the roster and the depth chart and all those things, because at the top of it is Alphonso Davies, and it's a conversation of where is he best suited to play. So, guys, without further ado, let's jump in. Welcome to the Through Ball Fullback Canada Men's Edition. All right, guys, welcome back to Through Ball. Again, if you're not familiar with it, this is me basically going through players I think who could be working on the depth chart for Canada or other countries. We've done one for Ghana when it was right before the World Cup. We're going to try to incorporate more, but this is a good little thing in the summer, the days where before European seasons get started, trying to highlight different things. And again, we just saw Canada at the Copa America have a good run, but also highlighted, some of the good players that they have, but also the depth that they have. And one of the interesting that came out of that tournament was reality that 26 or 26 was something that Jesse Marsh said. Marsh made the rounds. I feel that man was everywhere. And I mean, hey, Jesse, if you're out here, we'll take an interview too. If you want to jump on our meager platform, we'll take an interview as well. But the idea of the 26 players being there, or the 26 that are starting up, that's now the top level. Whoever comes after that, now it's a conversation of, can you beat that roster, beat that depth chart, or can you outperform them? That's what it comes down to. Now, fullback is interesting because I think the biggest question is Alphonso Davies. Where do you want him? Now, he plays fullback at the time of recording, which is mid-July. So just let you guys know that now. At the time of this recording, he is still a Bayern player, and he's a fullback at Bayern. And we saw him play the entire Copa America as a fullback. Now, what makes that interesting is we've had the conversation. Is he better suited further up the pitch, or is he better suited as a defender, playing a role that he's more familiar with? Now, I have been one who have kind of moved around with the idea, but I think I've settled here, which is I think he's best suited as a fullback, mainly because the depth isn't that deep. And I think it's worth pointing out. The reason why it's worth pointing out is because when we had the qualifiers for Copa against Trinidad, the fullback depth was Alistair Johnston, Alphonso Davies, and then they played Tejan Buchanan in that 5-3-2, or that 3-5-2, however you looked at it. And it does speak to the reality that we don't have that much depth. I feel that at the winger position, there's more players at that middle level, and that's what we talked about, right wing. And there were players we didn't even mention, like DeAndre Kerr, who's playing well for TFC, though at the time of this recording, he also just missed the sitter against Miami FC, or Inter Miami. So that's a thing. But I think for the depth of Canada, I think it makes more sense to leave him in that position because it opens up more possibilities up top, right? More wingers can get in and integrate themselves into the program. In the same breath, more wingers can push themselves in there. And I think on a fullback standpoint, now it opens the conversation towards who is directly behind them. With a player like that, you're not going to get that many opportunities, but perhaps with a player like that, you open the door for a conversation which is, I wonder what they can do now in this role. And so I want to highlight a few fullbacks that I feel have been called up in the past. I mean, we know the typical names. I think if everyone is healthy, they're looking to call in a combination of Alistair, Alphonso, Richie, and Sam Adekugbe. I am one, though, who emotionally is moving off of players. It has nothing to do with the players themselves, but it has more to do with you have to start integrating your depth. And I am one who will always complain just because the player is playing well. Doesn't mean that they don't deserve to be there. If you're good enough, you're old enough. That's what I say. But who are the players who maybe are just missing the cut or can take big steps moving forward? And I think that's where we can have a nice conversation with it. Now, the first name outside of those four, a player who started off as a fullback, but now is playing more in the center back role. I think he will be a good in the pinch fullback role. Someone who is familiar with it is Luc de Fougerolles. Playing right now, again at the time of the recording, he is still with Fulham, their U21 team. We just saw him start against Uruguay, and he had an up and down game, but you could see the moments, right? There are definitely moments where, I mean, he looks 18. There's nothing wrong with that, but you could see the potential. You can see the poise that he had. There were moments in the beginning of the game I was going to say, he is probably the most comfortable on the ball center back. And then he immediately picks up a yellow card. You're like, why? And this is what my tweets are always all the time. And I have so many tweets I don't send. But that's besides the point. So you look at a player like Luc de Fougerolles, I think he could be that emergency fullback position. I'm not the biggest fan of players who, because they've played it before, we can rely on them to play it again. I'd rather have a player playing their natural position, but I think he's an interesting call-up and name to bring up. After him, you have Dominik Zator, who's playing out in the Polish league, first tier there, and we've seen him get called up multiple times into the squad. He's a player who is a right back, but then also a center back, and I think most of this is all coming from transfer market guys, so you guys can look this all up. Also advanced filter, secondary or primary citizenship Canadian, a great time saver. So I think Zator could be an interesting player. We did see him a little bit against France when he came in, and not to say that he wasn't at the level. I think in a lot of times, players who are playing at leagues who non-top 5 leagues, right, non-big 5 leagues, you can always see that they need some time to adjust the pace of the game, the speed of the game, and you see that it's a big argument that's made with, say, like MLS players, where they'll say that this game is too fast for them, and we're in one league. And this happens when you go up in different leagues, right? And more either bigger leagues or deeper leagues with deeper talent pools, or just with higher leagues, your decision-making time increases. And so you have to speed up everything. So you have to be secure in what you're doing, securing what you see, and just moving in that way. So Zator is a player where I felt that was his type of a situation. And not to say the door is closed on him. He's also 29, so we are seeing him in his prime. Right now, maybe coming to the end of his prime. Doesn't mean that the player can't improve, but I think he's definitely a solid hand. Definitely someone who is familiar enough that we can bring into the fold and don't be afraid of it. Another name that's kind of interesting on the left-hand side, who as of this recording is not attached to a particular club, is Didier Nabzi. Didier Nabzi is playing currently, well, at the time of the recording, doesn't have a club. He was just with CD Legend, and then he was with Pau there. You may know him from his U23 time back in Olympic qualifiers for the Tokyo Olympics. But he's a player who's come from Blainville, coming from Quebec, of Moroccan descent, but went from Quebec, went to York United, then went to Pau FC, and then was kind of back and forth with Leganes. And I think he's an interesting player just because of the level that he's been playing at. Yes, it's been Ligue 2 and then La Liga B, but I think he is a player who has the experience. I think if you put him into this type of environment, he wouldn't be bad. He is a left-sided player, so maybe you could look at him as a player in the mold of, say, an Alphonso Davies, where you can play up and down the pitch on that one side. He'd be an interesting player. I would love to come in and see how they're able to perform and play. Christian Gutierrez, who is back at York, Chilean descent. We've always joked about the idea that, one day he'll play for Canada. During World Cup qualifiers, Herdman would always call him in, but he never played. Currently he's playing at Universidad de Concepción. I do apologize, the French came out there and I was supposed to sound more Spanish. I do apologize. Back left midfielder playing in Chile. I don't know if he gets a call up, but he's certainly a name that's not unfamiliar with the program and has been in. I don't know if Marsh's pace and his style and that level will accommodate for him. We'll see. We have to see him in we have to see him come through and play, so we have to wait and see for that. I think two players who are almost on two different sides of the growth. I say growth from the standpoint of, they could be interesting. They could be interesting players in terms of how they're able to continue to develop. So one is a duel. One is a duel that we see could continue to play well, and is playing well in the Croatian League. And the other one is a player who started off with great promise, but then we've kind of forgotten, but he is starting to come into his own as a game. And I want to look at and highlight Nico Seeger as well as Jaquil Marshall-Rudy. All right, Nico Seeger, he made the headlines a few years back when moved over he's Canadian born, from Burnaby. He's listed on Transfermarkt as a CDM, however, and he's listed as a CDM with right center back and center back overall as his positions of play. He's currently playing for Hajduk Split. I do apologize if I butchered that, guys. I'm so sorry. But when it comes to it, he's a player that I think a lot of Canadians are thinking he has been playing U20 for Croatia, and it's not an impossibility to see him come back. He does have that right back ability, but also center back. And then if you look at the position breakdown overall, I think there are so many center backs. There are more center backs in terms of possible names, as well as nines that are emerging. That it does make it interesting when it comes to what are the options. Nico Seeger could be a good utility defensive player. To put it in an interesting way, I think he could be the player that Herdman was playing Bombito as. Right, if you guys remember the Gold Cup in 23, Bombito was playing as a CDM, and he does have some technical ability with his feet and can play. Does have a little bit of that flair from a center back position, but he has the pace, which helps him the most. But Seeger is that player who is that CDM who can play as a center back, but also can step out wide as a right back. Almost, if you take out the CDM aspect, he is more of that Alistair Johnston build, in my opinion. A little bit taller than him, but he's an interesting player who, if he doesn't get called up to the Croatian national team, I don't see a reason why you don't make another run at him. Not because you're trying to steal him for any reasons, but I think he's a good enough player that he can come in and actually step in and play well, and I'm curious to see what he's able to do there. We brought up Jaquil Marshall-Rudy, who, at one point, add him to the combination of people who were saying he's the next Alphonso Davies. Now, it's taking a little bit of time to get some time, but he's now playing. He's that right-sided version, right? Right now, he is the understudy, but playing well. I think he started about half of the games and played about half of the minutes there in the season so far at the time recording. 1 goal, 3 assists in MLS action, and then 2 assists in the Canadian Championships. So about 1 and 5 throughout 23 appearances. That's not terrible. So 6 goal contributions in 23. That's not a bad. That's about a contribution every 4 to 5 games, which is a good rate for him. I would say Jaquil Marshall is an interesting player because he still has the name that people are watching. He has dropped a little bit in terms of his value. Transfermarkt had him valued at about 3 million euros, valued about April 1st of 2022. He's down to about 1.5. But I think he's still a player you can see that he is developing and getting more confident, whether it's just getting balls back to the center frame when they're heading back to him. He's made a lot of assists that way, or just his pace on the wing and his crossing ability. He's a player I think makes that next step, and I think he's one that I would like to see him come through, just because he's still only 20. His birthday just came last month. He is only 20 as a player, and I don't think the time is done with him. I think another good year at TFC, or if he has a good season this year, maybe he tries to move in that December window, and then he finds himself either in Europe. Europe would be the ideal place. Maybe like a Dutch league where he can play and just continue to work on his ability and technical side, because you can definitely see the aspects in the game. I think those two are interesting players in terms of could they do something interesting moving forward. I think he is one I would like to highlight. Now, I brought up Kwesi Poku earlier, and Poku is interesting because I don't know what he is anymore, and that's in a positive way, right? He has gone from, oh, he's that left mid, left back player, to the next thing you know, you're like, wait, he's a 9 now. And I think Kwesi is definitely that. Also, I'm very biased because, namesake, yo, Sunday Borns, we out here. That's a Ghanaian joke for those of you who don't know. Kwesi is interesting there because he's playing as a 9 where he started off as a fullback, left midfield, so I don't know where you place him. He certainly could be a player where he is just where do you want him? He can play there. I do fear a little bit where he becomes a jack of all trades, a master of none, and then you're kind of stuck with, well, what is he exactly? Like, at the end of the day, a good footballer is a good footballer. No one's going to complain. I think when it comes to a coach saying, like, where do you want to see him? He could turn into a player where it's just, well, we could play. He woulda, shoulda, coulda, but then nothing. So Kwesi is someone I think ultimately, as a 9, we are seeing his just tenacity, and he's fearless in terms of getting to spaces, right? Whether it's getting on the end of long balls, or just winning one-on-one races or duels, or just finding himself at the front when the ball is just there and putting it away. He is being fearless in his movement, and I love that. Does that make him more of a fullback, a left winger, a winger, a 9? At this point, Bobby Smith is going to keep playing him, and Kwesi's going to keep producing, and I'm excited to see kind of how that looks. So Kwesi's an interesting one. Also, shout out to Ryan Raposo, who's having a solid season as well. 23 appearances with 7 goal contributions this year. I think he's an interesting player. I think if you're going to pull the plug on a player like him, you want to do it now. But then I think him and Didi and Abzi might be in that competing for the same type of a role spot if you were looking at there. But that's kind of some of the names that I'm seeing here. Now, there are definitely more names out there. Guys, you let me know if there are players you think I've missed that we should add on to that conversation. I'm very much curious to kind of see how you feel about it, right? If you're telling me that a player like Carlos Leatherman deserves to be in because he has a dual opportunities with the US and Canada, you let me know. I don't know. You tell me. I'm curious to see what could happen as him as a player, but I'm more curious to see what could happen with the possibility. So guys, let me know in terms of fullbacks, and as usual, I'm gonna stop talking right now.